Okay, we'll go in 5, 4, 3, 2. Lana, welcome. You have one of the cooler titles in all of cannabis. It is VP Innovation and International Operations. It's a good title, but it's not your first title in the industry. You come to it with a wealth of a really long background in cannabis. Talk about your background, then we're going to talk about sort of the meat of the issue. But give us your background first, and then we'll get into it.
Sure, great. Thanks for having me, Jay. It's great to be here. I started in the cannabis industry back in November of 2017. So it does seem like an ancient era. Yeah.
It was all in front of us then, right?
That's right. And I actually joined a company at the time called Anandia. And Anandia, for those of you that remember, like Jay, was a cannabis science company founded by Dr. Jonathan Page, who initially sequenced the cannabis genome and started a science company that was focused on both breeding, so what we're going to be talking about today, and the very beginnings of that, as well as the testing side of cannabis. So before that, I came from the more traditional, I'll call it, horticulture industry, and so I brought that background to the cannabis side of things back then.
And you've seen a lot in that time, for sure, both the promise, the buildup. Let's call the normalization, certainly on the Canadian side of what the cannabis industry has. But also, I think importantly, like it was really, maybe with the exception of California, in the Canadian landscape, the first scaled market on a national scale. What has always been a challenge in growing cannabis, and you're going to tell me how kind of a challenge, is that there's like things that cannabis, it's hard to grow cannabis. That was one of my first realizations when I started in the cannabis industry. Like, it's called weed, but it is difficult to grow. It's even more difficult to grow if you're trying to pass, regulatory tests and pass what Anandia was doing, sort of analytical tests. Like, talk a little bit about some of the big challenges, and of course, don't leave out powdery mildew, which we're actually here to talk about today. But like, what are some of the challenges growing cannabis, period? What are some of the challenges growing cannabis at scale in a regulated environment?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing about cannabis that is different from most other crops, because, I mean, we grow cannabis in a similar way to other vegetables, fruits, flowers, whether you're growing it in a greenhouse or indoors or outdoors, there are other crops that are grown that way. So at its face, you're like, oh, I can grow peppers, I should be able to grow cannabis. But I think one of the key differences with cannabis is that because it is an inhaled, or it's destined for an inhalation consumption method, there's a very, very conservative approach to how, like, what products can be used, what plant protection or pesticide or whatever types of products can be used to support cultivation. So to manage disease in most other crops, unless you're using organic crops, you need a variety of, or producers will have a variety of different tools at their disposal. And in cannabis, we're just extremely, extremely limited. So that's a key difference. And so the only way you can really manage so powdery mildew, we'll get into it a little bit more, but the only way you can manage diseases like that is a handful of products that are safe to use for cannabis. And then we test, of course, the whole slew of tests to make sure that cannabis is safe at the end. And then also with a high degree of labor. And so the cost of managing a cultivation facility to manage disease and keep disease pressure down and not impact the flower itself is very high. And that's what got us down this path at the very beginning, was trying to understand or try to develop new tools for cannabis cultivation to manage these challenges.
And one of the challenges is powdery mildew. It's the one that even someone like me can see when you go into a grow. You know it when you see it. At least now I do. And anybody who's sort of familiar with the industry knows that it is a huge challenge. And as you said, there's limited ways to take care of it that are highly regulated, for sure. But also, if especially when the plant is due for inhalation, it's there's only so many products you can use, and short of that, or even addition to that, it's highly labor intensive. Yeah. And like, how do you, like, in addition to the other part that sort of we're here to talk about is, I guess, genetics. Like, what are the plants that are most resistant to it naturally, or how do you create them? How do you breed them? And like, have you cracked the nut? Did you solve this, Lana?
Yeah, well, I'll say solving. So powdery mildew is a fungal pathogen that to start off with. So again, many other crops that you'll grow in your garden or producers will grow at scale have fungal pathogens. So it produces a white coating that you can see on the leaves, and it can be on the flower as well. And it is not toxic to humans. I should stress that it doesn't have an impact to humans, or patients or consumers, but it does impact the quality of the product you get and often the yield of the product you get. Because as a plant is fighting disease, it's spending that energy on fighting that pathogen back instead of putting that same energy into producing more flower and producing higher potency flower. There's only so much carbon, and it's got to go somewhere. So we know the powdery mildew has while I don't have a stat for you, because every cultivation facility and operation would manage it differently and have different levels of incidence and how pervasive it is. We know that it is a very pervasive disease, and it impacts, I would argue, every grower out there. So what we started back in 2018 is we actually received Genome Canada funding, $4.2 million project in a partnership with UBC, to try to understand the natural resistance to powdery mildew in certain cannabis varieties. And so we've been on this journey since 2018, since before legalization, really. And we have just recently announced, so it's kind of a long-term play, but we just published in a peer-reviewed journal in the last month that we have identified a novel source of powdery mildew resistance that we have now protected with a patent application. And we are now using that resistance and the tools that we've developed in order to breed this resistance into our cultivars in the future. So long-term, we'll be able to grow cannabis cultivars that do not need either a product to treat the powdery mildew or the extensive labor used to manage it.
That seems like one of the holy grails.
Yeah, so since we started the breeding program, and just maybe a bit of history there. So we started the initial starting points of the breeding program in 2018. We built, so Aurora acquired Inandia, and that was a big part of the value proposition that Inandia brought to Aurora, the major part. Yeah. And so we've been breeding at our specialized facility on Vancouver Island since 2020 is when we first got the license there. Since then, we've turned out approximately 25 different novel cultivars that we grow in all of our facilities across Canada and export globally. And we've seen massive improvements in yield, in potency, and I can get into that a bit. But disease resistance is something that we've been really chasing to understand how certain plants are resistant, and then how do we then bring that into the cultivars of the future.
And as you said, those two things really go hand in hand, right? Right. If they're not spending plant energy, you're gonna correct my biology or whatever it is, horticulture. If they're not spending money on resisting that pathogen, they're actually the plant is spending the energy on making great, more potent flower.
So at Aurora, we've been breeding cannabis since 2018, and we've been very much focused on a number of immediate traits, things like yield and potency that we know are driving interest and uptake by the patients and the consumers around the world that are seeking our cultivars, as well as yield, which is very important from a profitability perspective for the company. We can grow more with the same amount of resources and just create a much lower cost per gram and overall gain a ton of efficiencies. And we've seen the impact of that. In the background, we've been working on this project to identify other traits and develop the foundational tools that enable us to identify disease resistance, and then we can start to bring that into our portfolio as well. And powdery mildew resistance is just the first of many traits in this way that we're going to be breeding for.
Oh, what's next? No.
That's one. I mean, a lot of things. So, I mean, certainly the story is not over on powdery mildew. Right. So next up, we've identified the source of the resistance itself. We have cultivars that have this built in that we've selected for. And this summer, we'll be starting to test those at scale in our production facilities and potentially with partners as well. And demonstrating the impact of lower labor and lower sort of management of those crops. As we look to future traits, we're very much focused on aroma next. So we know that no matter where we are in the world, patients and consumers want unique, intense, really interesting and differentiated aromas. And we're using the same approach. So it's a traditional breeding approach. We look at a huge diversity of plants, and we are selecting specifically, or we're crossing and then selecting specifically for those traits of interest. So things like fruity aromas are in our future, as well as new disease resistance, of course. As any breeding program in any crop, we always have to be thinking about what is the next big challenge and how do we get in front of that and create solutions through breeding.
It's exciting. It's nerdy and it's exciting. I would say, because it is something we don't have to, we're often talking about new markets opening up. We're talking about regulatory environments, about how retail is opening, certainly. But this harkens back really to like 2017, 2018, whereas like, what is the promise of a country, let's say, where the businesses are operating legally throughout the country, where there is investment, both, about research and testing, and there's rigor around all of those things. And this was sort of one of the things we talked about way back when, probably when we met, like, what can a country do that is fully legal and put real scientific rigor behind it, as opposed to like worrying about a marketing open up, but like, where does the science come in? Where do the people come in? What is the next wave of innovation? And right into your title, it's innovation and international business, right? Like that seems to be what the promise was way back, it doesn't even seem that long ago, 2017. But like, this was one of the things that as markets open up and countries, not just Canada, but, thinking about Germany and thinking about other markets, that this was the type of work that I think we were talking to Anandi about way back when.
Yeah. It's so gratifying to have been part of this journey through the entire process, and that so many of our team members have been here since the beginning, and we've had new ones join along the way. And I think it's a real testament to Aurora's vision that despite all of the ups and downs that the industry has been through, we have continued to invest in this. And probably when a lot of companies would have made the decision that that's not a must-have right now. And it's already paying dividends for us in terms of the productivity that our breeding program has delivered to the business. And now things like disease resistance. And then as we get into consumer, we already have tackled consumer-oriented traits with the potency side of things, but we can get into, like I said, the aromas. We've also focused on denser, larger, different bud structures that are more appealing to consumers. So all of those things can be tackled through breeding and a true scientific approach. And it's really exciting to see it all come to life.
Well, it's exciting to reconnect with you, of course, but also to hear about it. And I always like talking Canada, especially in these days when there seems to be some challenges between us and our neighbors to the south. So it's always nice to talk maple leaf stuff as we and talk about the cannabis industry. So, Lana, I appreciate you making time. Congratulations on the work. We look forward to connect with you about all the innovations coming down from Aurora. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jay.
You got it.
Bye.